With that, let's go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Future-Oriented Approach to Residential Development Task Force. First item on our agenda, well, besides call to order, is citizens' appearance. Do we have anyone in the who is set up to make a citizen appearance? Anyone aware of anyone? Okay. Yep, I don't see. All right, good. Well, moving on then to agenda item number 3. Consider the approval of the February 10th, 2021 Foard Task Force meeting minutes. Those were attached to the minutes for today. Has everyone had a chance to look over the February 10th minutes?
I did. I'll move to approve them.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
All right. All in favor? I guess show of hands. Or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Perfect. Minutes are approved. I have to scroll back up to our minutes for today. Agenda item number 4 is presentation by Alan Null from the Javelin Group.
So I'll do a quick, actually, and I didn't ask Sheila about this, but Sheila connected us with Alan Null, who is, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe, Alan, you're a Coppell resident. And so I apologize. I should have asked you for a bio so I could do a little.
No problem.
I didn't know if Sheila wanted to, since it's up to you, Sheila, but.
Absolutely. I can do a brief bio, but Alan Null is a longtime resident of Coppell, 20 plus years, I believe, correct, Alan?
About 30, yes.
About 30, and he's absolutely a Coppellite, and he's also a developer, owner, operator of several senior living communities in the area, and is extremely knowledgeable about this specific niche of development and in living. And we're just excited to have him to present to us his perspective, to give us a little bit more insight as we prepare and move forward on the initiatives as a task force to report out to the greater board. But I do want him to kind of tell a little bit more about himself before he jumps into his presentation.
Sure. Well, thanks, Sheila. And I was excited to learn that Sheila lived in Coppell. I serve on a not-for-profit board where Sheila does great work. And it's been great getting to know her over the last couple of years as I've been involved with them. As Sheila said, it's so funny, our son just walked over to our house, and it reminded me of this. So we moved to Coppell when our son was about 2 years old, and now he's almost 35. So I guess we've lived here 33 years. And we chose Coppell mainly, my wife was going to graduate school up in Denton at North Texas, and I was working downtown. So it was just about halfway in between, and we heard great things about the schools. So, it seems like yesterday, and now, a lot of things have happened, and it's, this topic is near and dear to me for a lot of reasons. I've lived in Coppell a long time. My parents are still very healthy and active. They're in their early 80s. They lived for about 25 years in Las Colinas in a house with 2 stories, and my dad developed some healthcare issues, and they decided they needed to move out of a 2-story house. So being in the business of this is one thing, but dealing with your own family members really, makes it all real. And we went through a series of years with my wife's mother where she had a stroke, and then she was in a nursing home here in Coppell for about a year. And then she passed away soon after that. So we have 3 senior relatives. My wife's dad lives in Coppell. My parents moved to Flower Mound in a little subdivision I'll show you in a minute. So, now we've got kids. We've got a 35-year-old son and a 28-year-old daughter. Prior to the COVID virus, both of our kids lived out of town. Our daughter lived in Austin, and our son has been in the San Francisco area for about 15 years. He went to school out there and stayed in the tech sector. So he just moved back for a lot of reasons from downtown San Francisco and bought a place over in old Coppell, whatever it's called, over by the Hard 8. And so now they walk their dog over here through a little series of trails, and they just showed up at our house a few minutes ago. So it's really awesome having kids nearby and having our parents nearby, but it's very challenging dealing with the emotional issues that go along with moving at an older age, and getting rid of your stuff is very difficult. So what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about the different types of senior facilities and senior housing. Unless you've really dealt with it or you're in the business, a lot of these things run together, and it's a little hard to keep up with it. So if you go to the next slide, it's really interesting. We've been in this senior-oriented business a long time, and I'm actually on the board of 2 not-for-profits in addition to being in the seniors business. But the senior institutional facilities are really a very recent phenomenon. They only really came about in the 60s. But prior to that, there were old age homes that were almost entirely run by not-for-profits. Most of those were religious-oriented groups that, just really had a passion for caring for folks who couldn't care for themselves. So that was really where the industry got started. And then it's evolved a lot, and it's still evolving. So if you go to the next slide, these are 4 examples that are very close by. And it's funny, in Coppell, the vast majority of senior institutional facilities are all within walking distance. They're all clustered together in one little part of Coppell. And I know the folks generally involved in all 3 of these. And if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of walk you through examples of each. And again, these are all either in Coppell or one's right across the border in Louisville between here and Vista Ridge Mall. So if you start with the highest level of care, it's very similar to nursing homes. That's really our primary business, is the nursing home business. It's very highly regulated. No one really wants to live in a nursing home. We've got a ton of employees, a ton of regulations. It's very expensive if the families have to pay for it. But it serves a valuable sector, and it really is. It sort of sits between hospitals and everything else. So our company has developed several nursing homes. We own about 8 of them right now in various places. But this is a pretty good example. I'd say the one in Coppell is well above average. Most nursing homes in the country I just turned 55, so I'm technically a senior myself. Most nursing homes in the country are about the same age I am. There's a lot of old, really bad ones that you would probably never want to put a family member in. This is a fairly new one. The guys who developed it are friends of mine, and it's really works well. And we had a lot of experience with it with my mother-in-law. So we're lucky to have a high-quality nursing home. But it's usually a temporary thing for folks unless they're really at the end of their rope. So nursing homes typically they're not a long-term solution for folks. They're usually short-term. If you go to the next slide, right next door to the nursing home, there's an assisted living facility. On the inside, it's much more residential. The biggest difference is usually at nursing homes, either the federal government or the state government pays for most of the cost. And you're not there very long if Medicare is paying for it. With assisted living, the operating model is very different. It's really not a healthcare facility. It's really more of a place where seniors need help getting dressed, and they need help reminding them to take their medicine. But there's much fewer staff, and it's much less expensive. But the government really doesn't provide any payments. It's really up to the families. And like I said on this one, it ranges. The memory care is more labor intensive and more expensive. So typically, it's a very typical assisted living project. These really even came about in the 80s as an industry. There really weren't assisted living buildings before the 80s. So they're a little newer, a little less intense in terms of the care. And again, they're all paid for by the families, and they're small spaces. Usually they'll have a microwave and a refrigerator, but they don't have full-blown ovens and kitchens any longer. And so the next slide is a little bit different. Its main component is independent living. And when people talk about senior housing or senior living, I think this is mainly what people have in mind. So with independent living, it's really more of a social model. A lot of what drives families into independent living is if a spouse dies. Most across the country, most residents in independent living are single women. So that's a lot of folks want to stay in their house as long as they can. So in independent living, as well as assisted living and nursing homes, another big factor is the meals are provided. They're available at these. In independent living, they all have commercial kitchens and dining facilities like a restaurant. Some have different meal plans because also in independent living, they're really like apartment units where each unit has a full kitchen. So the residents are certainly free to cook their own meals and entertain if they'd like, or go to the dining room and eat there. It's a little bit like college meal plans, usually is how that works. So they're larger rooms. By definition, the residents are more independent. They're more focused on social activities. They're more mobile. And again, typically when you think of senior housing, I think that's what I think of. Assisted living, nursing homes, memory care, those are all more in the healthcare area, but they deal with seniors. The next slide, some very good friends of ours developed this property. My daughter worked for them one summer when she was in college. This is an affordable senior apartment. We don't have any of these in Coppell. They're financed typically with tax credit financing or tax exempt bonds. So it usually, in order to facilitate one of these, the city itself needs to get involved. The biggest difference in these, and there's different kinds of senior apartments. This particular one is over near Vista Ridge Mall. It's about $1,000 a month. It's got a federal subsidy program, and it's restricted to seniors that only make up to a certain percentage of the county median income. Usually 50 to 60% is the target range. So in Dallas County, this is actually in Denton County, which is a little higher income than Dallas County, but that translates to about $1,000 a month for an apartment. Each apartment unit has a full kitchen, but because these are much less expensive than, quote, independent living, they usually don't have as many amenities. Some independent living projects have swimming pools and big movie theaters and big spas and things like that. just a standard senior apartment looks and feels like a normal apartment, but it's restricted to seniors only, usually 55 and older. Sometimes it's 62 and older. So it's just, this one's a good example of just a traditional apartment for seniors that doesn't have quite as many amenities. And then the next slide is actually in Flower Mound. It's where my parents moved to. This is a for sale senior only subdivision where they have fairly traditional houses. They're all 1-story houses, but you own your own house. All the other ones I talked about are rental. They don't have an ownership component. This is just a special type of subdivision. They're a little bit difficult. I'd say every one of these that we've talked about, they need various parcels of land. This one needs the biggest amount of land to make it work. And as you guys probably all know, there's not a lot of available land left in anywhere in Coppell. So an apartment takes a lot less land than a subdivision. This one's about 30 acres. And then the next slide sort of shows a bird's eye view. Yeah, it just looks and feels like a normal subdivision. I think the houses are around 2,000 to 2,500 square feet. I think my parents' house is an average house in there, and it cost about $500,000. It seemed very pricey per square foot to me. They sold a house that was almost twice as big for about the same price in Las Colinas that they paid for half the size of a house in Flower Mound. But there are some senior-focused amenities. It's a little hard to see, but in sort of the upper middle part of the screen, there's a little clubhouse. That was the picture that I showed you going in. So they can go in and play cards, and there's a swimming pool. This particular subdivision doesn't have a ton of amenities. There's a few mega senior communities out. There's one in Frisco. There's one sort of out west of Flower Mound called Robeson Ranch, and these are golf-oriented senior communities that have hundreds and hundreds of homes. There's a giant one outside of Austin called Sun City. So that's a type of development that normally happens in places where there's lots of inexpensive land, and seniors typically are fine being a little out from the traffic, and so that's kind of an appeal. The next slide just shows some houses in there, and then that's sort of the last slide is just a picture of some seniors. But that's the end of my slideshow, and would be happy to answer any questions. The only thing we've ever developed in Coppell is our house that we've lived in for 23 years. So I don't really know much about opportunities in Coppell other than there's almost no land available. So be happy to field any questions that anyone has.
Alan, this is Peggy Quinn. So we were looking at the fact as to what would it take to do like a high-rise, apartment style, senior living. How many acres would that call for?
It's a great question. And when you say high-rise, you probably don't really mean high-rise, like 20 or 30 stories. I doubt Coppell doesn't have fire trucks big enough to work with high-rises. And I'll tell you, typically the perfect height. So when you're dealing with seniors in a multifamily setting, and I know multifamily has a little bit of a bad connotation sometimes, but as opposed to a single house. So in an apartment style building, the perfect size is a 4-story building, because with every senior property, you have to have elevators. And once you pay for the elevator itself, going a few more stops doesn't cost very much more. And then the other reason it's so good, if you think about it, seniors, a lot of them, when they start out in a senior facility, they're very active. My parents walk around a lot more than I do, I'm sad to say. But as they get older and develop mobility issues, and most all of us will or do, it gets harder to walk distances. So that's the other great thing. If you can have the elevator take them up and down, then the hallways become shorter that they have to walk to get to their unit or get to the cafeteria or get to their card game. So the magic thing about 4 stories is that's really the maximum. It's the most efficient size because you can build it out of wood construction. If you go above 4 stories, the whole building has to be concrete or steel, and it makes the price go really high. Another thing you probably know about seniors, but if you don't, I'll tell you, is even seniors that have lots of money are usually very cheap, or frugal might be a better word. So my parents have, they've been really fortunate and they have plenty of money to do what they want to do, but they won't go to a restaurant unless they're getting some kind of special senior discount, or they're taking their own coffee cup to Panera because my dad's calculated, he only pays 3 cents a cup, and there's a good reason for their being that way. A lot of my parents' friends, people are just living longer, and unfortunately, sometimes people outlive their resources, and a big healthcare event can really devastate a family. There's lots of things that can use up resources. So I think their generation is a little more frugal than my generation, and I think it's a good thing. But what I found in the business world, you have to be careful of overbuilding, making things too expensive, because they'd rather save the money, and they're not as focused on their own, daily pleasure as they are, they want to save money for themselves and maybe for inheritance and things like that. So to answer your question, and I'll tell you one idea that's may be controversial, but I'll throw it out there. There is one place in Coppell, and I go walk around there all the time because our son lives over there, that would be the absolute perfect place to build a small-scale senior facility, and that's right in front of the senior center. Our son backs up to the walking trail that goes over to the community garden in the senior center, and we go walk his dog over there all the time. And I think there's enough room to do it. If you guys know Dr. Swaldy, Tony Swaldy, where his office is, right next to it, there's some vacant land. I think, in my opinion, I think that would be an ideal location, because another big thing that we try and do with seniors is it's hard. We try and we do things architecturally to encourage them to get exercise. And if you put seniors in the middle of nowhere, where the land's cheap, or you put them, near an industrial park or right on the highway, they're not going to want to go outside and walk around because it's not a good environment to do that. So the great thing about the area near the senior center is the senior center is next door, and the farmer's market is close by on a pretty day. It's shaded. That's another thing that's very important for seniors is shade when they're walking. If it's too hot or too cold, it's easy for them to just stay inside. So integrating some sort of senior housing with other amenities like that in the restaurants and the coffee shop, and so that's the perfect place to do it. There's not enough land to do much of one because it takes up a lot of land. I'd say a rule of thumb, it doesn't exactly answer your question, but it may get close to it, is if you're working with an elevator served building, a 4-story building, designed for seniors. They're usually more compact than a non-senior apartment. They're usually all in one building because of the elevators. So you can normally get somewhere 20 to 30 units per acre is a good rule of thumb, depending on the site and there's a lot of factors. So we're developing a senior apartment project in South Arlington, right on the border of Mansfield right now. We have a 20-acre site, and we're doing a combination. It's really a great fit for a lot of seniors. It's about 200 units in an elevator-served 3-story building. We're in the middle of a subdivision, so a 4-story building was just a little too overpowering for the rest of the houses around us. And then we're doing about 70 units in single-story cottages. There are some very similar single-story cottages at the independent living project that I showed you earlier that are up near the front. And those are great, especially for like my parents have a little dog that they walk around all the time. And it's much more convenient to let the dog out if you're in a single-story building than having to go down the elevator with the dog and all that. So I think you could do something on a much smaller scale, a combination of some senior cottages as well as probably a 3-story building in that location would probably work better than a 4-story for the same reasons. There's nothing anywhere in that part of town that's 4 stories. So I think you need to fit in with the neighborhood. But generally speaking, I'd say you need at least 5 acres to just do the vertical building. If you wanted to do some cottages or spread out a little bit more, more land's better. But, 5 to 10 acres is probably a good target. It's a very long answer to a short question, so sorry about that.
Yeah, I wanted also to ask a question. Thank you so much for your explanation. I think it's really inspiring to see your commitment to seniors, and now that you're a senior also.
Hey, there you go.
I'm
living it. That's right.
Right, you're living it. And so we've been studying this type of residential development now for a year and something. And what I really enjoyed about your presentation is you're looking at different options. And I think us seniors are also very active. I'm also a senior now. And my take on it is we have to offer different price levels, and that's what everything we studied. And also downsizing. I don't see myself going from the house in Coppell to a 2,000 square foot. I mean, I want to downsize. Maybe even a tiny home would be a great idea because we're tired of so much maintenance and whatnot. Sure. So in a project like you're speaking about, I am an urban planner. I understand the scalability and having, when you said the ideal height, I said 4 floors. In my mind, it came up. Sure. If we were to have a four story, and I mean that is doable. It's just a zoning thing, and I understand the fitting. But you have the darling houses that are 2 around there. I think that property might be really cool because then you'd be a walking distance or a biking distance from the senior and the garden and also the shops that need traffic and need people to desperate. They never last because nobody goes there. If you had a senior. And I like the concept of the it's the mix of age restricted subdivision, but then you spoke about the senior apartments with that federal subsidy would be really cool because then you could have some would be 1,000 to 2,000 a month, and then others would be property. I mean, we could have mixed uses or something like that would be really cool. So my question. After all this comment, sorry about that, is the costs. I know that going up and making smaller I know the price of the Coppell land is really expensive, but we are also going to have some industrial sites that might change uses that might be near that area of the railroad or whatnot. I mean, there's one piece of property that's on the side of the railroad of the Darling houses that you look at it and you go, what is this doing here? Like right next to the arts center. It's like, it seems it doesn't belong, but it's a huge terrain, a land there. I don't know how many acres, but if we're thinking out of the box and seeing it of incentives, and that's what we're looking at, what kind of incentives could the city give so that a private investor could turn one of these industrial lots into senior living, or it could develop that piece of land that you're talking about that's in front of the senior center? What kind of incentives? And you spoke about tax incentives and tax credits. Are those city, or are they county, or are they federal? We're trying to get the mix so that the city could propose these.
So the good news is the biggest barrier, this sounds backwards when I'm saying it, the good news is if the city is on board, it makes it so much easier. The biggest deterrent to developing projects like this is it's the whole notion of, we don't want any apartments. We don't want any of those kind of people in our neighborhood. And again, I'm not talking about Coppell. We've never proposed anything for Coppell. We actually spent about a year, had land under contract in South Lake for almost a year, fighting the city of South Lake. And we were just about to win our fight. If you don't know, the city of South Lake has 0 apartments. They're the most adamant of any city I've ever seen about being anti-apartments. So we were proposing very expensive single-story cottages that were basically single-family homes that had 2-car garages. They were very, very nice and very expensive. They would have cost $5,000 a month for rent, but the city hated the idea because they thought it would somehow open up the floodgates to apartments, and they don't like apartments. So they're an extreme example. We're having great success. My business partner and his wife have lived in Arlington for 25 years. She's a physician over there. So we've had we're partnering with the city of Arlington on our project over there. If the city is on board, that's a huge step in the right direction. So if that would make it much easier. So a few other things a city can do. There's a range. In the case of the land in and around the senior center, the city owns all of that land already. So like we're doing in Arlington, we could partner with the city. The city could be as involved as a city wants to be. In our Arlington strategy, they're issuing tax-exempt bonds because cities have abilities to do that. Sheila knows a lot about this. The not-for-profit that Sheila works for does a lot of affordable housing all over the country. And as a not-for-profit, our foundation partners with cities all over the country for various kinds of things. So there's ways to do that. The tax credits that I mentioned, those are a federal program, but they're administered by the states. And it's a very complicated process, but there is a way to do, just like Maria mentioned, if the city wanted to do a mixed income project or community with some federal subsidies, the city has to be on board, but there's a way to do that. So there's a number of things. The thing I would also say that's challenging, you mentioned the site near the railroad tracks. I personally wouldn't be in favor of locating a senior housing facility by the railroad tracks, mainly because seniors they're there all the time. And just some people sort of make fun of us seniors. I'll include myself because we're sometimes a little hard of hearing, but a lot of seniors are hypersensitive to sounds and vibrations, and it really it's not a great thing to be by an active railroad track. And a lot of the lenders and issuing agencies have very strict rules about environmental things nearby that, if power lines are too close or train tracks are too close or too close to an airport, there's a lot of things like that you have to take into account. The reason that we have so much great industrial land in Coppell has almost everything to do with DFW Airport and our proximity, and the fact that industrial sites don't mind being in the flight path and in the noise cone. People oftentimes, are different. So when you factor in all of those things, there's, it's hard. Flower Mound has a million acres. It seems like they go on forever. There's lots of vacant land out there. Coppell, it's one of the reasons we moved here as a young family and as a young real estate investor. I thought it would be a good investment because we would run out of land and my house would be worth more because there just wouldn't be land to build new houses. And I've seen that happen. I think when we moved here, there were about 10,000 residents, and there's not many more places to go. But there's a lot of things cities can do if cities want to do it. So anyway, there's options.
What's the price point on the cost per acre?
Well, it varies a lot. So a lot of this has to do with how tall your building is. We just developed, we mainly do senior projects. We developed a luxury hotel in Uptown a few years ago for some of our investors that I used to work for. And we did a 20-story building. So our land was crazy expensive. And there was just a little tiny bit of land and the building was real tall. So I would say for a typical senior project, I think about it in terms of price per square foot more than price per acre. But if you did price per acre, it's probably $300,000 to $400,000 per acre is normally what you can pay. It depends a lot on how the parking works. If you have room to spread out, one of the, you can make things fit in a small footprint, but it gets really expensive if you have to build a parking garage. That's very expensive to build. Bart is agreeing with me there. So in our hotel, we had a 4-story parking garage that the hotel sat on, and it's to hold all the hotel up and to do, it's just, so you want to avoid parking lots if you can, or parking garages rather. And frankly, I think Coppell is not geared to super high density. Some people want to live in more of a downtown, really bustling environment with lots and lots of people. I don't think that's a great fit for Coppell, but I think a medium density, an average density type of thing is probably a good example. And it's probably more in the 20 unit to the acre range is a pretty low to medium density for this type of thing.
So I guess my question is on So if you pay $300,000 per acre, and you're going to build 20 units or 30 units on there, is there a price that's too expensive to pay for the acreage because you have to pay to build the units themselves?
Well, it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
So generally, I mean, if you think about it, it has more to do with what you charge in rent than anything else. The expenses are roughly the same. It's really your price point. So you could have an identical building, and I'll give you an example. You know, in Arlington, our project is fresh on my mind. So we've got some very, very, very affordable units that the city is subsidizing for very low income seniors. And then we've got our medium priced units. So the very low ones some of theirs are, you know, $200 and $300 a month, and the city pays us the balance. So that's sort of how that works. The average this is in Tarrant County, so that the average quote affordable rate is about $900 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. And then the market rate, we don't have market rate units in this project because the city didn't want to do that. But if we were to have market rate units, the same exact unit that one family's paying $200, it's like an airplane ride. You know, one person's paying $200 a month, one's paying $900, and if it was just full market rate, it would probably be about $1,500 a month. So there's quite a range. So I think you first to figure out what you can afford to pay for land, you start with what your residents can pay, want to pay, what city involvement is there. In our Arlington facility, again, as an example, the city is a part owner, so we get 100% tax abatement because of the city's joint ownership. And our justification is most of the property tax dollars go to the school district, and we're not adding any more burden to the school district, even if we paid more money in most nicer suburban cities. Because of Robin Hood, the money doesn't go to our schools anyway. It goes to other schools in the state. So it's usually, when we're dealing with seniors, that's a fairly easy political thing. And, you know, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in our project in Arlington that can go towards reducing the cost that the seniors have to pay. So that's something the city can do if it chooses. But that's sort of how you build a pro forma. Is you first figure out what your income targets are, and then, you know, lumber costs the same no matter who's living in there. Concrete costs the same. Land, again, if city owns land, sometimes cities will do a long-term ground lease on land that they own. There's lots of ways to structure things. So it's really up to the politics usually on how aggressive a city wants to be. The city of McKinney, just as a random example, is fairly affluent. They've been really progressive in terms of working with developers to create very affordable senior housing. The city of Frisco has no affordable housing. So they're very similar cities in a lot of ways, but they just have different priorities and different political sort of, ways they look at what's important.
What are some of the other perks that you're talking about, like for the city of McKinney? So besides the co-ownership type thing, are there any other perks that they're offering?
I'd say that one of the biggest ones, the federal tax credit program, again, it doesn't cost the city anything out of their budget, but the cities are required to be supportive. That you can't force your way into a city with a tax credit finance project. You have to get a city council resolution supporting it. So there are a lot of different factors, and it's. I mean, I'm happy to. I love this stuff, so I could talk about it for a long time. I don't want to take up all your time or get too complicated. One of the things that is very interesting is there are city-related issues and also there are county-related issues. One of the challenges we have in Dallas County, just throwing it out there, is Dallas County, of all the North Texas counties, has one of the lowest average incomes across the county. So for a tax credit project, and there's a separate kind of financing called workforce housing that doesn't involve tax credits, but it usually involves tax-exempt bonds that, again, cities can participate in. The incomes that you can charge, or the rents you can charge, are tied to the county-wide income. So in Dallas County, we have much less flexibility because we're starting with such a low figure. Tarrant County's incomes are materially higher. Denton counties are higher than Tarrant County. Collin counties are higher yet. Rockwall has the highest because they're tiny, mainly Rockwall County. But if you're trying to put these different kinds of programs in place, you have to think through. It's like an 8-dimensional chess game. You have to think through a lot of different factors. So unfortunately, there's not a simple answer. But people like us enjoy working puzzles and figuring out things like that. So I can tell you, if the city of Coppell really wanted to do something, there's a way to do something. And I've just noticed I use Zoom a lot, but I'm not accustomed to the little hands. So let's see. Yvonne, I think, has your hand up, if I'm reading it right.
I do. Is it safe to say that at the cost per acre and the average income being what they are, that those are conflicting objectives in totality, even if you had that bond funded or as a ground lease?
Well, so it's complicated. If the city owns the land, then there's a lot more flexibility. If I won't use Donald Trump as an example as a real estate guy. People are tired of hearing about him. I know I am. We'll use Mark Cuban. Mostly people like him. He owns a lot of land in Dallas. So if Mark Cuban owned the land and he just wanted to sell it, if a private party owned it and, the city might really want this, but if the seller wants $1 million an acre and we can only afford $500,000, the city's not going to condemn his land and take it away and sell it to us at a cheaper price. So you have to deal with, if you're dealing with a third-party seller, it's like anything else. You have to do something that they're willing to sell at, and that can be a big range. If the city owns the land, you have a different dynamic because so the price of the land is one factor. It's not really the biggest factor. What I would tell you in Coppell, the biggest factor is the lack of land. A very good friend of mine who Mindy knows lives two houses down and built our house. He's owned a big chunk of land over very close to the other senior facilities. We're in the kind of the eastern part of the city for years and years and years. And he's been trying to get a subdivision. He finally got it approved recently. So I've always thought just driving around, hey, that would make a nice piece of land. It backs up to a creek and some floodplain. It would be quiet. But again, he's been working on it for a long time because people want to live in Coppell, and there's not hardly any places to build new houses. So in Coppell, it's very difficult because you're looking for something that home builders are also looking for, and office developers. I mean, a lot of people want land in Coppell, and there's just not a lot of land. So that's our biggest problem in Coppell, in my opinion, is just we just don't have a lot of things to choose from.
Hey, Alan.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
How are you today?
Great. How are you?
Good. I'm Subbu Venkat. Man, you are a wealth of knowledge. If you want to know about Coppell, just talk to Alan. 30 years of real estate. Yes, sir. I think you're going to the the elephant in the room, if you will. This is a small city with a big heart and a big ambition, but the land is not there. At the end of the day, there is no land to create this grand vision that they're talking about. But the problem is also not so simple, like you said. The senior residents want to live here like your own parents. They want to live in Coppell.
Sure.
But they don't want to live in big houses. They want to live in houses or communities like senior living communities. But taxes, let's talk about taxes. You're saying we should be able to give them tax break. So the city has to find the land, the city has to give tax break, and then you said it more than 2 times, I think. It's got to be political. What's the leverage? If I have to keep the citizens in town, then what's the leverage as the mayor and the council member? If I'm able to get 50, maybe 500 votes from these seniors, maybe that's why I'm doing this. I don't know. So it all comes down to various constraints. There is land, there is tax breaks, and then there is keeping the seniors happy. So with all that being said, if you were winning the mayor ticket May 1st, Alan, I'm telling you, you're going to be the mayor because we know that Karen Hunt is not running. And let's say we make you the mayor. What would you do?
Well, thank you for thinking that I could be the mayor, and I think I would be a lousy mayor. So I don't think you'd want me to be the mayor, but it's. I think to answer your fundamental question, if the city council, the mayor is one part of that, but if the city council as a whole determines that this is a priority, it's not that hard. It all comes down to priorities. No city, no matter how affluent, has an unlimited budget, and certain cities, again, I'll pick on South Lake. They're easy to pick on. Politically, it has nothing to do with their tax revenues. The city has plenty of money, but politically, their voters do not want anyone but very affluent people to live in South Lake. I mean, that's how they get elected. And if they veer off of that and have a conscience, they don't stay elected very long. So they've created a bit of a monster in their culture that I think they'll regret one of these days. So that being said, I don't think Coppell has that same problem. As you said, I think we're a small town with a big heart. It's one of the reasons we love living here. My office is in Uptown, so I drive a lot back and forth. But we like it here for all kinds of different reasons, as I'm sure you guys do. So my suggestion is, I think it would be worth a conversation. There's one other factor. It's maybe another elephant in the room. I like that phrase. And I really don't know how Coppell feels about this as a community. I know how I feel about it. So I love trees. We chose where we live. We back up to a creek. I've never counted them, but we've got to have hundreds of trees on our site, and it's one of the reasons we love living here. Is we're kind of among the trees, and they drive me crazy every fall because all the leaves fall in our pool. But I just like trees. So the site that I'm talking about, that I think would be the perfect place to do something, it also has a lot of trees on it, and you can't keep all the trees and build a building. You got to prioritize. So that may be a big problem. But again, maybe it's not a big problem. So I don't think it's insurmountable. And I really, I vote, but I don't really keep up with Coppell politics. I have too many other cities that I have to keep up with what their politics are doing. So I really don't know the current priorities or the current focus. I was so happy to, when Sheila reached out, to hear that Coppell is at least thinking about the dilemma that seniors have who want to stay here. Great example. My long-term real estate lawyer, he and his wife live in Coppell. He retired from the law firm 2 years ago. His son lives in Allen. He has a fairly large house. It's a typical, kind of size house for Coppell. It's just him and his wife. He hates the size of it. He complains about, but he doesn't want to leave, and there's no alternative to stay in Coppell. He really does. So he's in a quandary. He doesn't want to leave, and he doesn't want to stay. He wants to downsize. So there's, I think there's a lot of folks who are like that, and there's more on the way as the baby boom generation ages. So I think it's really smart to start thinking about it now. Frankly, it would have been smarter to think about it 20 years ago before we ran out of land, but it's better late than never. And I think there's a great guy you guys may know who's a former city councilman who lives across the street from me. And I've talked to him a little bit. He's been off the council for a few years. But anyway, I think there are people in Coppell who really could get behind something like this. But it's always a matter of priorities and trade-offs, and other city things everything has to fit in.
Russell, I see your.
Yeah, Alan, thanks so much. I've actually got, first to your question about the senior stuff, I think Matt should maybe address that. The land near there, if he's on this meeting, I haven't looked. But second, we do have a piece of land, but it has every negative you talked about. There's a 10-acre piece of land off of Beltline Road, right in between industrial sites, right next to a railroad. Yep. And so if you wanted to develop that, I guess the question I had was, with a 3-4 story kind of building complex and putting in lots of amenities, if you also combine that with transportation to the senior center, over to Cypress Waters, to all the different places,
sure,
would that alleviate some of that? And then my second question is really completely different than what you've talked about so far. We have, especially the North Lake Woodlands area, there's some areas that are 30+%, 65 and older homesteads, neighborhoods.
Sure.
In Coppell. Have you run into anybody who's actually rezoned an existing neighborhood and tried to go through that process? I don't want to spend too much time on that.
Oh, sure. It's possible, but it's almost impossible. The zoning part is the easy part. The hard part, it's the phrase herding cats is a good analogy. it's almost impossible to get every single person to agree to anything. People have speculated that, I can't even remember what it is. Almost everyone loves the smell of something. I can't remember what it is. It kind of blows my example out of the water. But other than that, it's almost impossible doing an assemblage like that. There are always holdouts. So it's almost impossible. And people have done it. You typically see that done in very, very expensive areas where people, the idea of a tear down house is very common in a lot of places, but it gets very expensive and it's cost prohibitive and it's very hard. The Cypress Waters, our daughter lives in Cypress Waters in one of the apartments over there. I think the challenge is it would be there's no real connectivity. I think I know the site you're talking about. If you could build a senior facility within Cypress Waters in the heart of it, it would be great. I think that would be very difficult given the people who control Cypress Waters, but it'd be a great place to live. I think living on the edge on Beltline it's not ideal.
I expected as much.
Well, Alan, I think we've maybe taken advantage of your knowledge and generosity for long enough tonight, but I really appreciate your time with us and the information. It was absolutely invaluable, and I'm seeing a lot of nods to.
Well, sure. Hey, I like this stuff, so it's fun to talk about my own little hometown. So I just haven't really ever thought about it, so it's great.
Thanks so much, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. We really appreciate you taking the time tonight.
Hey, anytime.
All right. Well, it sounds
we
like
have some questions in the chat.
Questions. I was going to say there may be some follow-up questions if you don't want to.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Well, I will definitely follow up in the chat if I can figure out how to do that. I think I can. My daughter knows how to do all this Zoom stuff. If I can't figure it out, do you have to still be on there for me to answer, or can I can do it right now, but I'm not a fast typist. So let's see.
I'm not sure.
Well, and
if I could make a suggestion,
sure.
I've had this before in other meetings. If you want to copy it down and just do something where you answer the questions and
That's
then
a great
send
idea.
the document to Mindy.
Perfect. I will do that.
And then Mindy can send it out to us, and then that way everybody can get their answers and stuff, and yet we can, it gives you time to think about the answers.
Absolutely. I will do that. I'd be happy to do that.
Great suggestion.
Well,
thanks
excellent.
again, Alan. Really.
Sure. And if you guys have other, want to follow up, Mindy knows how to get a hold of me, and Sheila does. And I like this stuff, so I'm happy to talk about it individually or in a group if anybody wants to talk about it. So it'd be great.
This is fantastic information. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys have a great evening.
Thanks. Same to you. Okay. That was great. Moving on to the next agenda item is presentation and discussion of report to City Council. Do we want to get that PowerPoint pulled up? There we go. Okay. Oop. Perfect. All right, so I do want to thank Peggy and Russell and Yvonne and Maria for helping me talk through the different parts of this, and also to Peggy for actually putting it together, because my PowerPoint skills are bad. and she's clearly superior there. So yeah, so this is the idea here is this will be somewhat of a run through of what I'll present to council here in a couple weeks. And then, if you want to make notes while we're going along, please do so. And then once we're done, give me your notes if there's anything, especially if there's anything we need to emphasize more or de-emphasize, or if there's something we, didn't cover in these particular areas that we should have. So just everyone have your critical glasses on. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we start off with a list of the pillars. These are the various pillars that relate to our board. These include establishing programs to protect the unique character of single-family home community oasis nodes, exploring new options for 55 plus or aging in place that maintain a high standard of living while reducing footprint, explore refit and refurbishment of older housing stock, and undertake studies to consider optimal future city population. Next slide, please. And this also lists some related pillars as well. So just to note that while our board's creation came specifically out of the housing related pillars, we also touch a lot of other areas. Things like, the multi-generational and communal living spaces, fostering, intergenerational programs. There's a lot of areas where it potentially touches. So, next slide, please. So our board first met in January of 2020, and we were initially focused by the City Council to look at the issue of senior housing. Over our first year, we looked at 11 different housing types and scenarios, and looked at which ones could potentially fit into Coppell or which ones currently did. But it's also worth noting up front that approximately 1/4 of our city's population is 55 and above. And out of 10,580 residential properties in the city, 1,910 of those, which is about 18%, have the 65 plus tax exemption already on the property. So there are, when we talk about aging in place, there are neighborhoods where this is already happening. Next slide. And this is a map showing the exempt percentage by subdivision. So you can see on the map which neighborhoods have the higher percentage of 65 plus tax exemptions already. So this is definitely already happening, as I said. Next slide, please. We wanted to, as far as our interim report to the council at this time, what we wanted to do was bring two ideas to the council that are kind of some short-term actions that we feel can have long-term results in the city as far as making us a great community in which to age in place. The first are financial incentives, and the second one relates to the village model of a community. And we'll talk first about the financial incentives. So, next slide, please. Our first recommendation is regarding city-backed financial incentives. Let's take a look at what the city already offers to seniors as far as financial incentives. The first is a 10% discount for water and sewer bills for those 65 plus. The second is a city property tax credit for those 65 and up, which we already mentioned based on the map. That is a $75,000 exemption in value for city taxes. Currently, at current tax rates, that equates to approximately $435 in annual savings for taxpayers with that exemption. We also have the school tax credit and tax freeze for school district taxes. It's $10,000 is the current amount for that, and also you have the ability to have your taxes frozen at the current valuation. Next slide. We took a look in this area at what other cities are doing, and there's a lot of different cities in the DFW area, so this was able to provide us with a lot of data and a lot of ideas as far as what Coppell could potentially be doing. And whenever you're talking about incentives, I think you have to look at the incentives as falling along one of two vectors, the dollar vector and the time vector. So one example is a dollar for dollar rebate for refurbishing older homes. This is a one-time rebate, so the time is, close to zero. And this tends to be a little more expensive because you're doing a larger one-time amount. You're not spreading it out over a period of years. You could also implement, other cities are implementing property tax freezes for city taxes, as well as, what school districts currently do. So that takes you on a longer time frame. So once someone turns 65, they could implement the tax freeze on their property, and that would last as long as they own the property. So they could be there for 20 plus years after that. And so the time frame goes out quite a bit. The dollars involved will climb as the time climbs. But when we're talking about aging in place, keeping a lid on property taxes, especially in Texas, is a key consideration. Something else that some cities are doing is providing a property tax exemption for refurbishing older homes. This is one that tends to involve less money and somewhat less time. The idea is, let's say that someone is going to spend $15,000 or $20,000 to refurbish an older home in order to make it livable, going forward for, adapting it for, use by a senior. Well, normally the appraisal district keeps tabs on someone pulling a permit, and then once the remodel or refurbishment is complete, then the appraisal district will go in and they'll just tack that amount on to the property value. Well, what this would do is say that someone can spend that money, but at least for the purposes of the city is not going to levy property taxes on the amount that was spent on that project. So normally you spend $20,000, the appraisal district is going to raise your assessment by $20,000. Instead, in this case, this would be the city saying preemptively, no, we're going to allow an exemption for the amount spent on this refurbishment project, and that can be for a fixed duration. They can say we're going to waive this increased valuation for 5 or 10 years, or it could be kind of like the 65 and up exemption, could just be as long as the person owns the home. So there's a lot of potential variables here, but this is a way to encourage remodeling, encourage refurbishment, and this doesn't take money out of the city's coffers because it's just property is still valued as it was prior to the refurbishment. Next slide, please. Our recommendation on this point is frankly that we think this idea of additional city-backed financial incentives deserves additional research on potential incentives and or to set up as a pilot program. The city could come up with any number of ideas and pilot them for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, see what kind of impact it has on refurbishments and remodels in the city, especially with the stated goal of encouraging aging in place. And remember, this sort of incentive can tie in to other goals in the 2040 vision, such as carbon neutrality. So we think this is an area that deserves future look and future action by the council. All right, next slide. This is a time for questions, so we'll move on from that. The next recommendation is a city-funded and organized village. There is this model that is called the senior village, and these exist throughout the country. And there is an organization called the Village to Village Network that is a overseeing body. They've kind of created the framework for this sort of organization. There's over 250 of them currently existing throughout the U.S. and Canada. So there's the map of those. They're all over. The idea of the village is that we are stronger when we work together, and that working together we can successfully navigate all the transitions that are involved with growing older. The emphasis of the village is on peer-to-peer networking. It's on promoting an active lifestyle and reducing isolation, and all of these together help improve health. You can kind of think of this as, it's a village that's not in a gated community. It's a village that you build out of where you are already. Next slide. So most villages are set up as separate 503c entities. Second. Yep. They are primarily volunteer run. Most have just one or two permanent employees. They can either be set up to be free, or there can be a sliding scale for dues. And the due structure can be based on what services a member wants to receive from the village, and or it could be based on income. So that's something to be decided at the initial setup time, but it's extremely flexible model. The village itself can provide some direct services, and then they can partner with other organizations to provide others, but then the village would still act as a hub. They can act as a clearinghouse to help their members find certain services. The National Village Network produces a toolkit to help get villages up and running for the low price of $150. So this is not an expensive investment in order to get one of these set up. But the idea is this will help you organize it, launch it, enlist partners, and of course keep the appropriate records. And it's important to note that you can have, and it's extremely common to have, people who are members of a village and who are also volunteers. This cross membership and volunteering, again, very common. And when you're talking about building community, reducing isolation, peer-to-peer networking, that's very much part of that. Next slide. So the common services that are offered in a village include transportation options. These could be to medical appointments and shopping, running errands for members, or to programs at the senior center or the arts center. So there's a lot of potential options there. They could also provide handyman services. Some of these could be voluntary and some of these could be paid. At a minimum, replacing light bulbs, especially if it involves getting up on a ladder, which most light bulbs do, or checking batteries in smoke alarms on a fixed schedule. Very easy for some members to do, for others that it would be extremely difficult for them to do. So you could have daily check-in calls for some members who might need that sort of service. And you could combine that with weekly physical visits, just to physically check in on people and, say hi. They know they're always going to see someone at least once a week. Some villages provide tech support, and these could be for PCs or printers or iPads, Skype, Zoom, any other software. So this is also very common. And then you could have home support. So you could provide an advocate to help a homeowner with major repairs or new equipment buys. Make sure someone is either getting a good deal or not being, don't want to say swindled, but not being sold something more than they need. For things like HVAC or computers, all of these things are needed in senior living. You can also have a list of vetted partnered vendors with special pricings. Again, companies that have already been vetted by the village and who are committed to providing a good service at a reasonable cost to the village members. You could also have things like roommate services to allow seniors, especially those who are widows or widowers, to find other seniors for roommate or house sharing. So again, these are a wide variety of potential services that could all come under this umbrella. Next slide, please. At the core of the village are the members and a board of directors potentially. Then you have, but basically it's the volunteers and the partners and any staff. So, and And around the core, we have all these things we've been talking about. Socially related services. You could have village planning things like social events or cultural outings. Under volunteer-based services, what we covered under the last slide, the kinds of help that volunteers can provide to members, referrals of service providers, and then, of course, health-related services. But all of these things revolve around the core, which is the volunteers and the members. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the village-to-village toolkit, the base building block for creating one of these, costs all of $150. So this is certainly not a big investment by the city, but I think you can have big results. The bigger question, if the city chose to pursue this, would be what different departments it would want to bring in. And this could potentially touch a lot of different organizations and especially volunteer groups that already exist within the city. So a lot of these pieces are already there. It's really bringing them together into like this one umbrella that makes it easier for seniors to find the services they need to age in place. So for example, we already have our wonderful senior center and they have a great facility and great staff. We have the Citizens Patrol. They're used to driving around, is providing or is stopping by for weekly hellos to members. Is that a big step up in their duties? Possibly not. We have the allies in community who are dedicated volunteers who want to get out there and interact with the community as well. And there's also the opportunity for corporate partnerships to help in the any costs associated with the village. Under the operational umbrella, what you really need is, this marketing, whereas the city puts out this, they let people know this exists and that they're looking for volunteers and members. You then have a launch. You organize events and services. You always have to review what a village is doing in order for it to stay current and stay vibrant, and make sure that it's continuing to be useful to its members and the community. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, the Senior Center provides a very logical administrative and operational hub for an activity or for an organization like this. And they already have the leadership. Team, that's used to dealing with seniors in place. So they're an obvious place to manage the village out of. They would coordinate and manage outreach services by volunteers as well as Coppell partners, as we mentioned. Okay, covered most of this. Okay. Might be an area where I trim down a little because I think a lot of it is restating what I've already stated. Okay, next slide, please. But yes, a key idea behind the village is we're leveraging our existing resources without negatively impacting the city's budget. Again, we start with the village-to-village network toolkit, leverage the Citizen Patrol, leverage allies in community, and of course, transportation options. These can range from peer-to-peer. They could be volunteers, or also there's GoGo Grandparent, which is a neat service for seniors that want to use ride sharing, but don't want to deal with an app on a smartphone. It's an actual number that they can call that will then arrange a ride share for them. So that's a neat service as well. Next slide, please. As far as the marketing is concerned, the city already has a number of marketing avenues that it already enjoys. So I would, point out that obviously we have email blasts that the city sends out. We have the water bill mailers, and we have the city's shiny new website as well. It is noted that the city would need to discuss with the village network to fully understand from a legal perspective what the liabilities are for volunteers that would do house visits or computer work or that sort of thing. So that's an area the city would need to be sure and look into when it was setting up what services the village would be providing. But the good news is the Village to Village Network is there to aid with their experience. Again, there's more than 250 of these already running. So they're a valuable source of experience and best practices. And also, this is not something that has to be done in one fell swoop, one big thing. It doesn't have to be rolled out as one huge finished product. This is 100% something that can be done bit by bit, phased in, pilot this idea, try out this thing. But the idea is that over time you see what works and you build on this, and you're focused on, what's working, what people want, and what people are using. And this is not designed to be a static thing by any means, but it's designed to be a living, breathing organization that is going to evolve over time and continue to meet the changing needs of Coppell seniors as we try and meet that goal of helping them age in place. Next slide. Okay, and that's the end of that. So I see Subu has his hand raised, and I also saw some chats come in. So Subu.
Oh, yes, sir. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question was, I'm trying to be reflective, Bart and Peggy. So the Foard concept was part of the Vision 2040, and it was started at least when the finances of Coppell were really stellar and much more green. And then we all know what happened with the Amazon warehouse, with the Supreme Court ruling that taxes for all these e-commerce have to be paid by the city of where the resident is. So that.
Well, my understanding is, just hate to interrupt you. My understanding is that specifically applies to the Staples warehouse. Amazon had a completely different tax deal. So, but I get your point.
Yeah. So my point is the revenue stream has changed at the end of the day post this vision for 2040 in terms of so there's definitely a deficit today with the city, and they are looking to cut budget and save money and all those things. We know about all that Mike Land and his team are working on. With that being said, I like all the proposals that came in the first part of your presentation in terms of other cities. And I'm actually happy that, in comparison with other cities, Coppell is already doing a lot for seniors in terms of tax, whatever benefits they can, including the water bill and stuff like that, and the school district. With that being said, do they have to do anything more additional? Would there be appetite from the council? And is there money in the budget to even fund it, or are we saying we have to, get from Peter to give Paul? Who's the Peter and who's the Paul here? Yeah.
Well, that's one reason with the home improvement or the refurbishment or updating tax rebate that I mentioned. In a way, that's kind of revenue neutral, because the idea is if someone spends $20,000 to update their home, and the city says, at least for some period of time, or maybe as long as you own the house, your home value can continue to go up, but we're just not going to specifically add that $20,000 from that refurbishment project to your value in order to tax you. That's, from my perspective, that's revenue neutral. Because it's not that they're giving up money, it's just that they're agreeing not to take in that additional fund that they didn't already have.
And it's not
so that's one.
It's not income that was ever budgeted. You don't know that 5 houses in Coppell are going to spend $20K to upgrade to put in ADA compliancy. So the city never counted on it.
From a budget perspective, I think that's a good one. Also from a budget perspective, I included the idea of, someone spends $5,000 and they get a $5,000 rebate from the city. I don't expect the city to go for that, but I just wanted to include that as kind of something in the spectrum of ideas that exists, because that would actually have a budget impact. Of course, my understanding is that usually comes from grants or other funds, but still, same idea.
So, Bart, are you looking for a motion to carry your presentation forward on the 23rd?
I think that is a great idea, Peggy.
Okay, then.
Is there a motion?
I move to carry this presentation forward for Bart to make it on the 23rd to the City Council.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about that, Peggy, because I would approve the motion of moving it forward, but I have suggested in the chat that there could be a couple of slides we could incorporate after the incredible conversation we had with Alan from a developer's perspective, because I think there's many stakeholders in these decisions, and I think what he said was very relevant. So I would support that motion if several slides were put in there with the information that Alan gave us.
I don't think that we have enough information or backing of that information to actually create new slides yet. I think that that's coming, but I don't think, he threw a lot of stuff out there, and I think that we need to chew on it a little bit and to take a step back and maybe
would answer our questions. He said he would answer our questions in writing, and
well,
if
I can,
yeah, but
if I can remind folks, the idea here was presenting some short-term ideas that we think could have a big impact, like in the very near term. Kind of a more general shift towards encouraging kind of a little more dense senior housing developments, I think that's going to require a bit of a longer lead, as far as, because Alan said the city is not always looking real favorably at the idea of multifamily, which is what a senior apartment is. And hey, Maria, the stuff Alan was talking about and presenting, I'm like, this is so cool. I love this idea. This is great. But at the same time, I think that's more than like the tax incentives, the village stuff. That's stuff the city could get up and running this year.
Well, no, but he also said, and sorry I'm interrupting you, but he also said if the city is in, and if the city supports, all these federal funding could come into play. So I'm not saying fully develop that, but at least reflect it in the slides, that a backing of the city for developers could turn into things like this, and talk about McKinney. And what I want to say to the board is all that we're speaking right now is very, very new, because it's as us baby boomers get old that the cities are having this. I had the conversation at Cedar Hill and spoke about the Foard committee, our Foard committee, and they were like, "Oh my God, we're having that same thing." I spoke in Hutchins, they're having the same thing. I spoke in Duncanville. They said, "Oh, we're having the same problem." So we could be a beacon of a good example of studying this. And I would just add 2 or 3 bullets and some pictures of what other cities are doing, because I think Coppell has always innovated, and we've always been at the peak of leading the way for this region. And I think it's important to put those findings in a slide. I don't see the problem, Peggy, the date today and the 23rd in incorporating those slides. I'm sure Mindy could support that, as the questions come in, just create, another slide with some pictures of what he spoke about. I don't see the problem in approving this with that caveat.
Because what he spoke about, he gave us great information, like, for example, partnering with Coppell on the land that they own, and then we wouldn't have to pay school taxes. So building something is very doable. But we haven't really sat down with Matt and said, what will that look like? These other low-hanging fruit things, we know we can answer any question.
But you could put a verb like explore, look into the cases of McKinney.
They know that we're exploring that because that was Bart's first slide. Here's what we're supposed to look at in pillars, and here's what we're looking at. We're looking at.
And also, I will say that we did kind of make the decision to present to council these short-term things, while this year, and I know that's something that's our next agenda item, is talking a little bit more about and exploring more about all housing types and how they fit into Coppell and how we go from there as far as analysis. So,
Maria, Maria, I'm not saying that that's not something that we need to bring to the council. I believe that we do, but I believe we need to cook it better, and then have it a well-rounded presentation for them, and not just take what he said and just give them, just highlights of what we really haven't delved into yet.
And Bart and Peggy, so this is what I felt like the slide where you show the 2 short-term options. Maybe there could be a slide before that kind of gives a landscape of the options and why we select, and then we get into the 2 short-term options and leave the rest for that we are further looking at as a continuing process in this particular exercise.
So in other words, say, look, we're working on a lot of things.
Yes.
But these are longer-term research projects.
Exactly.
In the meantime, we wanted to bring you.
Absolutely.
I think that's smart.
Yeah. So that way everybody gets the landscape, but then there is also a rationale for why we chose to present these 2 ideas, because they are something that can be worked on soon and looked at. But then there's all the other things, and those other options we can later on roll into at a later presentation with whatever Alan mentioned and all those things. We can bring all those things in together with more material in there.
So, Commissioner,
I have a question because I get the sense, I'm just going to go with the feeling that I'm getting. I'm getting the sense that we're clearing things through each other, and that's really not the intention of this board. There isn't a hierarchical society here. This is a team effort. And that said, you have new ideas and innovative ideas approached here. So I would caution you on that. The second observation that I have here is that, in all honesty, you'd be wasting all of our time if we went forward and there was not a healthy pulse check for the city to prioritize that. He gave you the one bit of information you needed, which is that it has to be a city priority from a financial perspective before we even begin further researching or prioritizing this, because the probabilities seem pretty lean. That said, the pillar clearly says we need affordable housing for seniors. Those of us represented on this call are proof of that, and that's why people leave the city. So I would, at a minimum, ask for their guidance concerning that pulse check in terms of a timeline or a strategic plan, which every city has, that identifies where this falls in the priority. Because it looks like from a development perspective, we have very few options relative to the size, acreage-wise, the zoning and the bond funding and the tax abatement, which is a very long-term process to getting all the documents filed.
I agree with Yvonne. We need to check that pulse now, because and I also agree with Yvonne. We're not experts at this. We were asked as citizens to look at different options. So if we're already closing the options, I don't think we're doing our job.
No one's closing options.
Yes, Peggy, you're closing options. You're saying that we have to flesh it out. We're not experts.
Well, I mean, remember when we had the matrix, right? And we started going through and saying, well, should we keep this or take this out because it's, relevant or not? And we decided we're going to keep everything in for now because
but then
the goal going forward
Brad, it's
IQ
really
study done.
it's really not fair that we have 8 options and you don't even have one. Like, how many slides do you have for all the options, and then you just focus only on the village, which is low hanging fruit. I believe as Yvonne. Listen. I believe as Yvonne that it is a good. I mean, we've worked for a number of months now to check pulse. Is the city going to back a proposal of affordable living for seniors? Let's check that out. I mean, is that something that wants to be discussed? Because I don't want to go into the nitty gritty of South Lake, but the reality in South Lake is they're not scared of the 3 or 4 flights. They're scared of the diverse community that might move in if they lower the prices of their living. But in the case of seniors, that we are aging here and we want to downsize and we want to stay, it's the same people distributed in a different way instead of in a 1 floor in a 4-floor building. So it's a different discussion. And I believe, as Yvonne, that we should ask guidance about this because it is doable. You looked at the acreage that he was talking about, and it wasn't the 10 acres. It was much less if you went up. And so I understand that a lot of people don't like apartments because they fill up with, with low income people or junkies or whatnot. Well, this is not the case. This is a building for seniors. It's very similar to what we have in Moore or what we have in Sandy Lake, but it's exclusive for seniors. And I think it's important to check the pulse. If we continue to delay the research until we're ready, what if we lose another year and there was no political backing for this idea?
We have a working
If we go to council and check the poll, if we go to council and say, do you support affordable senior housing? But we don't have the results of a future IQ study. We don't have concrete recommendations about all the different property types and how they do or don't fit into Coppell. Who's going to say, no, seniors, get out of here. We don't care. They say, of course, it's very important to us. It's part of the pillar, right? But I don't think it's going to tell us anything useful, honestly.
Well,
we have to remember why we came up with this idea was to, again, touch base with them quickly. Yeah, Russell, please.
Yeah, can I first? I think Peggy asked the question of Alan about high rise because we're all very interested in that concept. We just know that it's the most complex solution possibly of all the different things we looked at in the near term because we don't understand the budget. So can we on the ask of getting clarification, can we just ask maybe to get some clarification on what priorities are now that the budget has changed?
Yes.
Make it a little bit more general because I'm not giving up on that concept. I think it's really awesome. I think in the near future, this is all about 20 years out, right? I think we're going to have maybe entire shopping centers with empty, pavement parking lots that are downtown that may be available to us. So being able to look out and say 10 years from now, if, self-driving cars are starting to take off and we're, only using 15% of our parking lots and everything except grocery stores and restaurants has gone away, will there be retail space we can reclaim, or will some of the warehousing be reclaimed? And those are the kind of recommendations that I think, we can make in this next year as we get more information. But I think we're all kind of, other than the village and the tax stuff, we don't know what the city's doing. I don't even know if they know really where the budget stands right now, given everything that's gone on in the last year. We got a double hit with COVID and the changes in the tax structure. So
yes, in all honesty, though, they should know. And then B, this is Yvonne again. I think the broad challenge from the pulse check is pretty specific. It has to do with the fact that we sit in Dallas County and that average income number carries weight. So the fact is, a decision should be pretty straightforward on whether or not they would even consider.
Okay, well, maybe I've been misunderstanding the question you're wanting to ask, because if you're wanting to ask the city specifically, so we can talk about, hey, here are all the things that are still out there that we haven't dismissed, but they're for longer range stuff, and we're going to do more of this. And maybe, Bart, you put stuff in about what we're doing with Future IQ to not to address the senior part of it, but to also start looking at the rest of the pillars and, a way forward at the end of the presentation. But then also maybe, and to make that happen, we need to ask this, we'd like to ask this question, because it sounds like the question is really around, do we want to take advantage of federal tax credits, which means subsidized housing?
That is one of the questions. That was one. The second was the bond funding. The third was ground lease. So it proves, A, that you explored it, B, that you had an expert give you that guidance. That would be something you'd feed to the consultants. My fear is that this would just stall and you'd be out there researching for a year and nothing would move forward. The city has things that they can move forward with from an exploration perspective while we're waiting.
Okay, well, I think maybe, to me, getting some guidance on what the word affordable in Coppell means is what I would like to know.
Awesome.
Because me downsizing to an apartment in a 4-story or 3-story senior living complex where I'm paying half of my current mortgage and I'm getting half of the space or, less, that's affordable versus subsidized federal housing. Those are two different issues. And
exactly.
If we ask the guidance of, what do you draw the line as affordable? Is it multi-tenant housing that allows people to downsize and still stay in Coppell? Or are you able to handle actually bringing in subsidized multi-tenant housing?
Those are the questions. Yes.
Well, I mean, it's multi-tenant housing for seniors. Let's be clear.
Exactly.
So it's an option for your seniors to downsize. Right now, there's no option for seniors to age in place and downsize. There is not an option.
Right, but any new housing stuff, any new housing inventory that we bring online, there's no guarantee Coppellites are going to be the ones filling it, especially if it's affordable. And they may get taken and you may be on a waiting list instantly, right? I mean, so we have to understand that this isn't really, because we can't discriminate about who's going to get these housing units.
Understood, but the requirement in the pillar was affordable housing to age in place, right?
It's an option that's there that's not there right now. And you can, because if, let's say the city's in on it because it's their property or whatever, you can put the requirements. I mean, they do this in New York. It's a group of people that are in a building and they have certain requirements for certain types of tenants. So if we're trying to incentivize the Coppellians to age in place, you can do it.
Well, what you just talked about was one of our other housing options, and it wasn't a government run because the federal laws do not allow you to say only Coppellites can actually come into and buy a property or rent a home.
We're not saying that. We're very clear that you're going to have a menu. It's very, very clear because the requirement is different. You have apartments today where someone who is not 55 is living and paying a premium, $2,500, $2,700, whatever that is. In the future, based upon whatever the affordable housing option is, there may be a $900 option, a $1,900 option, and a $3,200 option. But there are options nonetheless. Gaining perspective on the direction they'd like to steer us for research, I think keeps us from going down other bunny trails based upon feasibility within our city constraints.
I agree with you, Yvonne, but let me say one thing. This presentation, the city council has asked us to present to them recommendations. We're not at a recommendation state yet for any of these other housing things. Now, I will say this, Mindy told us that the city council wants to meet with us to go over and have a working session with us. And I think all of these questions about how far do they think that they were willing to go, and how far is the budget willing to go with all of these things, needs to be at the working session. It needs to be at a session where they're there to answer these questions. But at a city council meeting, and I've attended lots and lots of them over the 30 years I've been here, it's for us to present workable ideas and recommendations from this board that they can move forward with today. And that's my point. Now, we have a working session coming up with them. Mindy may know the date.
No, it will not be until the new council is seated. So it will be after May, depending on, there will most likely be a runoff election, considering the number of people running for different seats. So I don't know when that will be, and they have not set the dates for the joint meetings.
But I think a joint meeting, is it possible for us to ask for a joint meeting before the new council so that we can, because I think the council that's there can probably give us guidelines and guidance that the others will probably agree with.
I guess you have the potential issue of X% of council might not be there in 2 months, right? So the council's focus could absolutely change in that period of time.
I guess it could. How many council members are up for re-election?
We have mayor. Place 2, place 4, 6, and I think there's 4 seats that are up.
Yeah. That is exactly correct. So with 4 places up for re-election and a new council possibly coming up in May, now we are in already end of March. I think this might be putting the cart before the horse.
So, but I have another question. Is there another way to ask these questions, or people that we can ask these questions to? Is it Matt? Is it Mindy? And pass it on up the chain? Or does it have to be the city council? Because you guys have to have a clearer view of the budget now than you did a year ago. And, you know, it can at least give us a little bit, because again, I don't think any option is off the table, because a lot of our options are in the future. Recommendations are going to be 5-year window, 10-year window, 15-year window, 20-year window, because I think our plan needs to be moving forward to take those kinds of leaps, because it's a 2040 plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just need clarification on what the current council thinks is of what they could have the stomach to go to war about as it relates to affordable housing. And then, you know, 10 years from now, that may be a completely different thing. And so they might be willing to put something in a 10-year plan and, you know, revisit it back, you know, down the line. And we know that technology is changing things. Commercial real estate has completely changed in the last year. Everything is on the move. So yeah, my recommendation is just ask those questions through our current contacts at the city and see what kind of answers we can get back. Follow up at the working council or working meeting, a little workshop that we're going to have. But let's just get these low-hanging fruit things out there to this current council so that, you know, it's something that maybe we can get out to our citizens in the next couple of years. I don't want to be unrealistic. They can start making positive impact.
I agree.
If I can,
okay, so I'm sorry, was I interrupting something?
oh, no. I was just going to say if I could throw in something.
Yes.
I wonder if a better approach then is instead of taking recommendations, take an overall view of what y'all have done so far. And these are some short-term options we've come up with. These are some long, medium, long-term, whatever. Are we headed in the right direction? And get their feedback that way. Because I think if you approach council right now and say, do you support affordable housing? That puts them in an awkward position to answer that question.
I agree.
I don't know that any of them are going to feel in a great place to say absolutely not.
Yeah.
I think, but yet you're not really presenting them with enough data to really make a decision on. I mean, honestly, so it's more of the concept. Do you support these concepts that we've been working on? Are we headed in the right direction so we know whether to continue down this road to at a later time bring you more, concrete recommendations? Because then you're going to get your pulse point on if you mention senior housing, senior apartments, if you mention those kind of things, it's easier for them to say, we really don't like this concept than to come out and say, no, we don't support affordable housing for seniors. If that makes sense. I saw Matt turned on his camera, so he might have wanted to add something too.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you completely. When I present to council at a work session or whatnot, on the last slide, you say first, do you have any questions, and then ultimately we'd like your views for. Are we headed in the right direction? Give us some guidance, because this is the first time that you're going to bring anything to council, and so they're going to expect to hear, of course, your research, everything that you've done, but they're going to want to give you some guidance, and so I think if you ask for it, and then maybe bullet point it out, these are some ideas. This is the direction we're headed. Is this okay? Do you want us to focus on these alternatives or not?
I think that the whole reason they put this committee together is for you to do the research that they haven't done. And so right now, bringing them recommendations and then asking their pulse on something, you absolutely have to get that feedback from them, but they don't have all this background history that you do on all of these to make any kind of real decisions at this point. So in my mind, it is, we're bringing you everything we've researched. These are midterm, long-term ideas we have. We need to hear from you if this is the right direction or not. So that we can continue further.
Well, and I would add, Mindy, that if the whole council changes, then it's good as a pulse so that we can get ready for then recommendations. But I think what we have to do is up to date. We've done this research. These are the ideas that are on the table. We have a set of best practices that have worked in McKinney and this place and this place that involve, this type of development. Give us some feedback, give us some guidance, but then we'll have to regroup and present it to the new leadership if some of them change.
Yeah, this is where we're in an awkward time point, honestly, because you do have a transition in council. So council has not set the March deadline for y'all. That was really you all that decided you wanted to do it by the end of March. I'm not trying to delay you any further because I know you want to start moving. And so I'm not suggesting delay it. But if you don't want to have to repeat yourself, is it better to delay it? Would you like to put some of this information down that we can get to them so that they have a little bit of history, a little bit of the information, so that whenever the time does come, there's a few things that can be done to help set them up for better success, giving you guidance on what to do. And I think, one of the early pieces of information that was given to us was they don't know what they want right now. They probably will know what they don't want when you present it to them, right? Because if they knew what they wanted right now, they wouldn't have needed to form this committee. So,
but if we present this to the city council that's sitting there now, what you're saying is that the city council is going to completely change out. So if even if they said, yes, we're for this, and this on a slide, I mean, then in 2 months, we'll have to redo that again versus us presenting the two ideas that they can act on today and at least look at and start, and leave that as their legacy, so to speak, as they leave. And then we have another presentation where we take the pulse of the new people and the new council, so that we put our time and effort into what they will accept versus.
I typed up the questions. That could be there, and I think you're spot on. Proceed with your presentation. Just add a parking lot with those questions that says, in order to conduct adequate research, we need answers to this type of question. And I think that that's a reasonable compromise. But remember, we're not just answering to the city council and their call. They created this because the citizens of Coppell felt it was needed. So as a senior citizen in Coppell, I'm not willing to take a passive approach, because that means years. As it is, even if we did further research and recommended it, we're many years away from that, which is a risk of exodus of your seniors.
Oh, and I would add that they're in the ones that are running for re-election. They're not going to want to fix an unpopular vision of this. I mean, they are running for re-election. They don't want all the seniors not voting for them. So, the deadline was put by us. I don't see the purpose in presenting to a council that's going to shift and change. I would just, do whatever other research we want. I think the presentation that Bart put together is really good, but, make it more robust and start with the new council members if there's a change.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of appetite for not necessarily going ahead with the presentation in 13 days.
I have. Can I just get in a word?
Yes.
The way I think about this is, if we really are looking for some pulse or some feedback, whoever it is still the current council, and it is very likely that many of these people will come back, right? So why are we discounting that possibility? It is all work done up until now. We can still get their feedback. We know we don't go with a recommendation. I like Mindy's suggestion. We talked about that earlier. Is go with asking them if this is the right direction that we are headed towards, and take it from there. It gives us something to focus on as well.
So when I wrote down Mindy's kind of overall suggestion, it was reformat to summarize our year's work. Here's what we've done. Here's some short-term recommendations. Here's where we're going. And then then basically asking them to provide feedback, and knowing the city council, it doesn't have to be them, but knowing that they'll get that to us when they will. So that I think was kind of the more general view of the presentation. So I guess if someone wants to make a motion one way or another about something, then we can proceed or not.
So I'll move forward with the presentation on the 23rd, but we add some slides, like Mindy was saying, that talk more about where we've been, or the things overall that we're looking at, and the questions that we need answers from and guidance from the city council on, because some of the things involve things like bonds and federal programs based on income and things like that.
All right, so there's a motion from Peggy. Is there a second?
I second it.
All right, we have a second. All four, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
So Bart, in light of the fact that we're not meeting again before the 23rd, is it possible for you and I to meet to revise the slides and then meet with Mindy so that we make sure that we're hitting the nail on the head as to what
I think that's smart.
mentioned?
I would propose send it out to all so that everybody can look at it.
Okay, but
Send it out to
Mindy,
the whole committee.
I think the start is for Bart and I to revise it and also make sure that we hit the nail on the head for what Mindy was talking about.
I just wanted to check in with Mindy and Cammie to make sure that wouldn't cause any problems, open meeting wise.
Yeah, we actually talked about this earlier today in regards to if we put a presentation out there and everybody was working on it at the same time, that's difficult. If we send it out to everybody and everybody sends their revisions back so that I can kind of compile those and let you know, then we can do it that way and it's no problem. I would say though, I mean, do you think you can do that, get everybody's feedback and revise again by March 23rd? I'm not trying to stall you on the March 23rd. I just want to make sure you feel like you have time to do all that. So
Yeah, I think the bones are there.
Yeah. Can everybody send in? So you want everybody to just do a couple of slides or something and send them in, and then we compile those?
I would say more. Let's take a stab at a revision.
Okay.
And send that out to everyone.
Okay.
And then
So
just
Bart-
ask when we do ask or send to Mindy. She can send out to everyone, and then ask for everyone's comments within X minute.
So Bart, you want to get together then this coming week so we can get that together as fast as possible?
Yeah. Okay. Goodness. Well,
So
I know
will
we've taken.
mention-
Oh yes.
real quick.
Mindy, please.
So when you say get together this next week, that we would have, I want to make sure I'm looking at it correctly. We would, next week is really as they build a packet next week. So that's where I just want to make sure that gives y'all time.
Yeah. What is our due date? I guess is the best.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we really, I mean, I have to let the city secretary know that you're going to do the work session presentation, which we've already, so it should be on there already. We could probably remove it as late as the 19th, but they will post the agenda on the 19th. So just, I mean, again, I'm not telling you can't get it done. I just want to make sure y'all are aware of, kind of that timeline to make sure you feel like you can get it done by then.
All right. Well, Peggy, let's you and I kind of target the first part of next week, and then we'll get it sent out to everyone.
Yeah.
Just ask for
Everybody should know though that
turnaround.
you've got a tight time to turn it around to Bart and I once we send it out, I guess.
Perfect.
Mindy, does the actual PowerPoint have to be ready by the 19th when the agenda is?
No, it won't be included as backup. It just depends on if you want council to have it in advance or not. We could put it as backup, but typically, but I will say on work session, there's typically some type of memo or something as backup. So that would definitely be out there and ready for the 19th. So
At a minimum, we could give them an outline.
Yeah.
Okay, the last agenda item is discussion about advanced scenario planning.
Okay, so I'll make this quick because I know it's late and everybody's ready to go. But we did get a revised proposal from Future IQ. They've added an additional phase. So now, originally they had it, if we started in February, we would end in November. So now push it back. So my comment was going to be, is that something y'all still want to proceed with? And really the extra phase was just that added community engagement. And so he built in a considerable amount of time for added community engagement. So if so, I would say if you all still want to proceed with taking this to council, I would mention probably at the end of your presentation that's something that you think is the right next step for the group, to kind of put that out there. And then we would have to prepare and take it to city council for approval. I can't guarantee you whether or not they'll approve it or not. So I just wanted to see if that's something y'all want to pursue. Smart City is not taking it, so we would be doing it independently. They're just not taking it right now. And so just kind of getting your pulse point on this, is it something you're ready to still pursue right now? And if so, I think it would be great if you could add that as kind of next steps at the end of your presentation. And then we can start working on getting it in front of council for consideration for approval.
So I think we should take a motion on that.
Good point. So is there a motion to continue with the proposal to take a future IQ study to the city council?
Yes, I raised the motion.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Good, we will continue with that.
Hey,
Right.
I have a question. So was the question that we might not go forward with them? I thought we were going.
We had pretty much, we decided that even with or without the Smart City Board, we would move forward without them. I just wanted to, we've let that rest for a little while because we were trying to wrap this up. So I just wanted to bring it back to you one more time, let you know that there is added time in there now. And again, we'd have to look at, without knowing kind of our time frame for council approval. If we get council approval, I don't have exact dates of where that's going to take us now. So I just wanted y'all to know that he did add in the time, the price stayed the same. And we would definitely be moving forward, because I think the last time we talked, we said there was a chance that we might be moving forward without the Smart City Board. And we've landed on, we would definitely be moving forward without them.
Okay. Next agenda item is new business. Is there any new business for us to consider at this late hour? Okay, fantastic. Well, hearing none, that has concluded our agenda for the evening. Thanks to everyone for sticking in there with us.
I have one thing for Mindy. Mindy, when Alan dropped off, he didn't have the chat questions unless he had copied them, because he would lose them when he dropped off. So I copied them and I put them in a Word document. If I send those to you, can you forward those to Alan so he can get back to the people who asked the questions?
Absolutely. And did you get, I know Maria added some after he...
I did. I got everything.
Okay, you got all those? Okay, perfect.
I captured everything from the chat.
Absolutely. Then I will absolutely send those on to him tomorrow, and so that he knows what questions to answer for the group. And then I'll get him the answers back out to the group once he responds. So
perfect. Thanks. I just wanted to let you know that I had done that.
Oh, thank you.
I saw him drop off and went, oh, why? He doesn't have any of the questions. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Bart.
Bart,
no problem.
You see, I posted questions in the chat too, Bart, just FYI.
Yes, I copied those. Thank you.
I got them all.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I got
Thanks,
everything
Yvonne.
from Yvonne. I got everything from everybody who posted in the chat.
Great. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for your time tonight. Thanks for sticking with it. We have reached the end of the agenda, so we are now adjourned. Have a good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.